My daughter-in-law called me a pig at my son's wedding, and the part that hurt most was not her voice or the laughter that followed, but the way my son stared down at his shoes and let it happen. I was standing near the entrance of the Harbor Grand Hotel in Charleston, smoothing the front of my navy blue dress with both hands, trying to convince myself that the little tremble in my fingers was only from the air conditioning. The ballroom was beautiful, all white roses, gold chairs, crystal lights, and soft music floating over the sound of expensive conversations. I had arrived 30 minutes early because that is what mothers do. We show up early. We check if the flowers are right. We ask if anyone needs help. We smile even when we are not sure where we belong anymore. My son, Daniel, looked handsome in his black tuxedo. For one brief second, when I saw him standing near the altar doors, I remembered him at 7 years old, missing both front teeth, running across our tiny backyard in Ohio with grass stains on his jeans. I remembered packing his lunches before sunrise, sitting in bleachers during freezing Friday nights, signing college loan papers with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. I had raised him mostly alone after his father died, and I told myself every hard year was worth it because one day he would stand tall, loved and happy. That day had come, and somehow I was standing 20 feet away from him, feeling like a stranger at my own son's wedding. Brittany Caldwell, his bride, came gliding toward me in her fitted white gown, her blonde hair pinned like a magazine cover, her smile bright enough for photographs and sharp enough for private wounds. She looked me up and down slowly, the way someone might inspect a stain on a tablecloth. Then she laughed, not loudly at first, just enough for the bridesmaids beside her to lean in. "Daniel," she said, lifting one perfectly manicured hand toward me. "Why did you let your mother come dressed like a pig?" The sentence landed in the air with a softness that made it worse. No shouting, no scene, just a cruel little joke wrapped in perfume and pearls. A bridesmaid covered her mouth. Another looked away. Someone behind me gave a nervous laugh, the kind people use when they are too cowardly to be kind. I turned toward Daniel. Not Brittany, not the guests. My son. I waited for him to say my name, to step closer, to tell his new wife that I was his mother and deserved respect. Instead, he adjusted his cuff link and stared down at the polished floor. That was when something inside me went very still. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I only touched the small pearl necklace at my throat, the one I had bought for myself after closing the hardest business deal of my career, and smiled as if I had not heard every word. Brittany tilted her head, pleased with herself, mistaking my silence for weakness. Then a young wedding coordinator hurried over with a seating chart and led me away from the family tables, past the glowing centerpieces and the front row relatives, all the way to table 19 near the service doors, where the air smelled faintly of coffee, linen spray, and roasted chicken. My place card did not say Margaret Whitmore. It did not even say mother of the groom. It said Daniel's mother in small gray letters, as if I were a footnote in the story I had helped write. I sat down carefully, placed my purse on my lap, and looked across the ballroom at my son standing beside his bride. He never looked back. And in that quiet moment, while Brittany smiled for the photographer and Daniel pretended not to see me, I understood that this wedding was not the beginning of their new life. It was the end of my pretending. I sat at table 19 with 6 people I had never met and one empty chair that seemed to understand me better than any person in that ballroom. The servers moved in and out through the double doors behind me, carrying trays of salad and baskets of warm rolls, and every time the doors swung open, a draft touched the back of my neck. From where Brittany had placed me, I could see the family tables perfectly. Her parents sat near the center, beneath a chandelier that scattered gold light over their champagne glasses. Her mother, Evelyn Caldwell, wore a silver dress and a diamond bracelet large enough to catch attention from across the room. Her father, Richard Caldwell, had not arrived yet. Someone at my table whispered, because an emergency board call had delayed him. Still, his chair waited at the front with a printed name card, fresh flowers, and a folded linen napkin shaped like a crown. My chair wobbled when I shifted my weight. My name card was printed on thinner paper than the others. I noticed these things because women my age notice everything after decades of being told we are imagining it. On the wedding program, Brittany's parents were listed as Mr. and Mrs. Richard Caldwell, beloved hosts and proud parents of the bride. Daniel's father, my late husband Thomas, was mentioned in a small line near the bottom, misspelled as Tomas. My own name was not there at all. Not Margaret Whitmore. Not mother of the groom. Just a blank space where a lifetime should have been. I ran my thumb over the edge of the program until the paper bent slightly. It would have been easy to tell myself it was a mistake. A busy wedding planner. A printer error. A harmless oversight. But then I remembered the way Brittany had smiled when the coordinator led me away from the front tables, and I knew. This was not a mistake. This was placement. This was a message. During the first toast, Brittany's maid of honor stood and talked about elegance, legacy, and marrying into the right kind of family. People laughed politely. Daniel smiled with his eyes fixed on his plate. I watched him from across the room. Searching for the boy I raised inside the man who would not look at me. When the applause ended, Brittany took the microphone. Her voice was sweet, polished, and bright, the kind of voice people trust before they know better. She thanked her parents for giving her a standard of class to live by. She thanked her friends for protecting her from cheap drama. Then she glanced toward the back of the room, just long enough for me to feel the hook in it, and said, "And thank you to everyone who made the effort to look presentable today." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the bridesmaids. I placed both hands flat on the table. The woman beside me, a kind stranger with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain, leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Are you all right, dear?" I wanted to say yes because that is what I had spent most of my life saying. Yes, I am fine. Yes, I understand. Yes, do not worry about me. But the words would not come. I looked down at my navy blue dress, the one I had chosen because it was modest, clean, and the same color Thomas used to say brought out my eyes. It was not designer. It was not new. But I had pressed it that morning with care. I had pinned a small brooch to the collar, a silver rose Daniel gave me when he was 12, bought with money he earned mowing lawns in our neighborhood. I had worn it because I thought it would remind him that before all these white roses, champagne towers, and polished speeches, there had been a mother who taught him how to tie his shoes and balance a checkbook. Now the brooch felt heavier than it should have. Halfway through dinner, Daniel finally came to my table. Not with Brittany. Not proudly. He approached like a man walking toward an obligation. He bent down near my chair and said, "Mom, please try to enjoy yourself." I looked at his face, at the careful smile meant to keep me quiet, and asked softly, "Did you hear what she called me?" His jaw tightened. For 1 second, I saw the answer before he gave it. "Brittany is under a lot of pressure," he said. "Do not start something tonight." There it was. Not confusion. Not shock. Not an apology. A warning. I folded the program in half, then in half again, keeping my hands steady. "I see," I said. He glanced toward the head table, where Brittany was watching us over the rim of her glass. "I mean it, Mom. This day is important to us." I looked past him at the flowers, the lights, the guests who had no idea they were watching a woman disappear in public. Then I looked back at my son and nodded once. "Yes, Daniel," I said. "I can see exactly how important it is." Daniel walked away before I could say anything else, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive cologne and a silence that seemed to settle directly over my chest. I watched him return to Brittany, watched her slip one hand through his arm as if she had been waiting to reclaim him, and watched him lean down when she whispered something in his ear. He smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. A real smile. That was the moment I stopped blaming the room, the seating chart, the wedding planner, or the stress of the day. A woman can make excuses for many things when she is trying to protect the last soft place in her heart. But there comes a point when the truth stops knocking and simply opens the door. My son had heard enough. He had seen enough. And still, he had chosen comfort over courage. The dinner plates were cleared, and the band began playing something slow and polished near the dance floor. Guests stood, laughing and smoothing their dresses, drifting toward the center of the ballroom beneath the warm lights. I remained at table 19 with my water glass untouched and my folded program beside my plate like a small paper coffin. Across the room, Brittany was glowing. She moved from guest to guest with that practiced sweetness of hers, touching arms, tilting her head, accepting compliments like they were overdue payments. She never looked ashamed. That is what struck me most. Cruel people often expect their victims to make the scene for them. If I had cried, she would have called me unstable. If I had raised my voice, she would have called me jealous. If I had left, she would have called me dramatic. So I stayed. I sat straight. I breathed slowly. I let her believe I was smaller than I was. A few minutes later, the photographer began gathering family members for formal pictures. Brittany's mother stood beside her. Her aunts were called forward. Her cousins, her college friends, even a neighbor from her childhood street took turns smiling under the floral arch. Daniel stood near the center, looking handsome and distant. I waited for someone to call my name. I waited the way I had waited outside classrooms, hospital rooms, and airport gates for most of my son's life. After several photographs, I rose and walked toward the group, careful not to move too quickly. The photographer glanced down at his list, then back up at me with polite confusion. Before he could speak, Brittany stepped forward, still smiling. "Oh, Margaret," she said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "We are keeping these photos clean and coordinated. Family set first." I looked at Daniel. His face tightened, but he said nothing. "I am his mother," I said quietly. Brittany's smile did not move. "Of course," she replied. "We will try to squeeze you in later, maybe after the cake." Squeeze me in. 2 words, soft as satin and sharp as glass. I felt several eyes turn toward me. No one stepped forward. No one corrected her. The photographer looked uncomfortable, staring at his camera strap as if it had suddenly become very interesting. I nodded once and stepped back. Not because I accepted it, but because I finally understood the performance. Brittany did not want a family portrait. She wanted a portrait of a family without me in it. As I returned to my table, I passed the gift display near the entrance. Crystal bowls, white envelopes, wrapped boxes tied with silver ribbon. On the table sat the check I had mailed 3 weeks earlier to help Daniel with wedding expenses, $10,000 from a savings account I had built one careful month at a time. Brittany had deposited it without hesitation. She had used my money, then placed me near the kitchen doors. I stood there for a moment, looking at the ivory card box, and something in me cooled completely. Pain was still there, but it no longer led me. Shame no longer led me either. I went back to my seat, picked up my purse, and took out my phone. There was an unread email from Caldwell Medical Systems, sent at 5:42 p.m., while I had been sitting through dinner pretending not to notice the laughter. The subject line read, "Final board approval confirmed. Welcome, Chief Executive Officer Whitmore." I read it once, then again. Then I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. Across the ballroom, Brittany lifted her glass toward me with a tiny smile, thinking she had won. I smiled back, not warmly, not bitterly, but with the calm of a woman who had just remembered exactly who she was. For a few minutes, I simply sat there with my phone face down beneath my palm, feeling the quiet weight of that email through the thin case, as if it were a sealed letter from a different life. Around me, the wedding continued as if nothing important had happened. Forks touched china. Glasses chimed. The band shifted into a softer song. Brittany floated through the ballroom with her bouquet resting against her hip, stopping at each table to accept praise, her smile widening whenever someone told her she looked like a princess. I watched her the way a doctor might watch a symptom finally make sense. For months, she had treated me like an inconvenience, but I had blamed nerves, family differences, wedding pressure, anything except intention. Now I could see the pattern clearly. The changed rehearsal dinner time, she forgot to tell me. The bridal shower invitation that arrived 2 days late. The way Daniel stopped answering my Sunday calls unless she was out shopping. None of it had been accidental. She had not pushed me out with one shove. She had removed me one polite inch at a time. A server placed a slice of chicken and green beans in front of me, then apologized because it had gone cool. I thanked him anyway. I had been raised to be kind to people doing honest work, and that habit had survived more humiliations than I could count. At the front table, Brittany lifted the microphone again for what she called a little personal toast. Her voice rang cleanly through the speakers, sweet and confident. She thanked her mother for teaching her grace. She thanked her father for showing her what success looked like. Then she turned toward Daniel and said, "And thank you, my love, for choosing a future instead of staying trapped in the past." The room gave a warm, uncertain laugh. I did not move. Daniel looked at her with a strained smile, then glanced toward me for half a second. That was all. Half a second of knowing. Half a second of guilt. Then he looked away. I folded my napkin across my lap and remembered him at 10 years old, sitting at our kitchen table with a science project due the next morning. He had cried because the volcano would not stand straight. I stayed up until 2 in the morning with flour on my hands and glue on my sleeves, helping him rebuild it from cardboard, and newspaper. The next day, he won second place, and when he ran to me across the school gym, he shouted, "Mom, we did it." We. That word had carried me through years of overtime, used cars, store-brand groceries, and birthdays where I told him I wanted nothing so he would not notice there was no extra money. I never told him what I gave up. Mothers rarely do. We turn sacrifice into routine so our children can call it childhood. Brittany's laughter pulled me back into the ballroom. She was standing near the cake now, surrounded by bridesmaids, telling a story with her hands lifted delicately in the air. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. "He came from humble beginnings," she said, and the little circle around her smiled. "Very humble. But I believe people can rise above where they came from." One bridesmaid looked past her shoulder at me and quickly lowered her eyes. I almost pitied the girl. Almost. Brittany had mistaken cruelty for sophistication, and too many people had mistaken silence for agreement. I picked up my water glass and took one slow sip. Cold. Clean. Steadying. In my purse, beside my reading glasses and lipstick, was a printed copy of the employment agreement I had signed that morning before driving to the hotel. Caldwell Medical Systems had been bleeding money for 18 months. The board wanted discipline. Vendors wanted answers. Employees wanted leadership. Richard Caldwell wanted a miracle, but did not yet know that the woman his daughter had placed by the service doors was the one hired to deliver it. I had not planned to reveal anything at the wedding. I had come only to bless my son, eat a modest dinner, and leave with my dignity intact. But dignity is not the same as invisibility. And as Brittany raised her glass again, glowing beneath those expensive lights, I realized she had built her perfect day on a dangerous assumption. She believed I had nothing left to lose. The strange thing about being underestimated for a long time is that you begin to recognize the exact sound of it. It sounds like a polite laugh when you walk into a room. It sounds like your son saying, "Do not start something tonight," when you have not raised your voice. It sounds like a young woman in a white dress thanking everyone except the mother who helped pay for the flowers on her table. I had heard that sound in boardrooms too, years before my hair turned silver and people started assuming I was harmless. Men in tailored suits had once looked past me while I explained balance sheets they had not bothered to read. Younger executives had called me Mrs. Whitmore in that soft, dismissive tone, right before I found the error in their projections or the hidden debt in their quarterly report. I had never been the loudest person in any room. I had simply learned to be the one who noticed what others missed. After Thomas died, when Daniel was still in high school and the mortgage sat on my kitchen counter like a second grief, I took consulting work wherever I could find it. Rural hospitals, small medical suppliers, a nursing equipment company in Kentucky that was 3 weeks from closing. I traveled by bus when airfare cost too much. I ate peanut butter sandwiches in rental cars. I wore the same black blazer until the lining tore at the shoulder, then sewed it myself under a lamp at midnight. Daniel thought I worked in administration because that was easier for him to understand. I let him think that. Children do not need to know every mountain their mother climbs in the dark. By the time he graduated college, I had developed a reputation no one in my family cared to ask about. I was the woman boards called when the numbers did not make sense and no one wanted to admit why. I did not save companies with charm. I saved them with patience, discipline, and a refusal to be fooled by polished people hiding messy truths. Caldwell Medical Systems had first contacted me 6 months earlier through a search firm in Atlanta. At first, I almost declined. I had stepped back from full-time leadership and was enjoying quiet mornings, my garden, and the small freedom of not checking emails before sunrise. But then I read the company reports. Late vendor payments. Executive bonuses paid during layoffs. Family expenses buried under vague consulting categories. A culture of fear dressed up as tradition. It was exactly the kind of house that looked beautiful from the street while the foundation cracked underneath. Richard Caldwell and I met privately at a hotel conference room in Savannah. He was courteous, nervous, and proud in the way wealthy men become when they realize money cannot fix judgment. He told me his board wanted someone outside the family, someone with no sentimental ties. I remember folding my hands on the table and saying, "Then do not hire me unless you are ready for honesty." He said that was what he wanted. I wondered if he understood the cost. Now, sitting by the service doors at his daughter's wedding, I knew he did not. Across the ballroom, Brittany leaned close to Daniel and laughed at something one of her friends said. Her hand rested on his chest, as if she had purchased not only his love, but his history. I thought of all the times Daniel had told me Brittany came from a good family, as though goodness could be measured by the size of a house or the shine on a bracelet. I thought of the $10,000 check, the misspelled name of my dead husband, the empty space where I should have stood in the photographs. Then the ballroom doors opened, and a hush moved through the front tables before anyone announced a thing. Richard Caldwell had arrived. Richard Caldwell entered the ballroom with the expression of a man who had brought the storm in with him, but was trying not to let it show. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, yet there was nothing relaxed about him. His mouth was tight. His shoulders carried the weight of a phone call that had not ended well. Evelyn rose from the front table at once, smoothing her silver dress and smiling as if the room belonged to her. Brittany turned so quickly her veil brushed against Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she called, bright and sweet, the perfect daughter returning to her part in the play. The guests applauded politely, assuming the important man had simply arrived late to his only child's wedding. I remained seated near the service doors, my hands folded over my purse. Richard kissed Brittany's cheek, shook Daniel's hand, and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. For a moment, everything appeared normal. He was the proud father. She was the radiant bride. Daniel was the grateful new son-in-law. Then Richard's eyes moved across the ballroom and found me. It was not a glance. It was recognition. His entire face changed. The champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Brittany followed his stare, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed her face. She said something to him, but he did not answer. He set the glass down on the nearest table and began walking toward me. Conversation softened as people noticed him moving away from the head table with sudden purpose. I stood before he reached me, because old habits of professionalism do not disappear just because a room has tried to make you small. Richard stopped in front of table 19, and the man who had entered like a host lowered his voice with unmistakable respect. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I am sorry. I had no idea you were here tonight." Every person at my table looked at me. The kind woman with the reading glasses blinked as if she had just realized she had been sitting beside someone from the evening news. I gave Richard a calm nod. "It is your daughter's wedding, Mr. Caldwell. You had other things on your mind." His eyes flicked toward the place card in front of me, then to the service doors behind my chair, then back to my face. Something like embarrassment moved across his features. "You should not be seated back here," he said. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because the truth sometimes arrives wearing a very plain coat. Before I could answer, Brittany appeared beside him, her perfume arriving first. Daniel was behind her, pale and tense. "Daddy," she said lightly, though her voice had lost its polish. "How do you know Margaret?" Richard turned to her. "Brittany," he said, "this is not the time." She gave a small laugh, too quick and too sharp. "I just asked a question." A few guests nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. The band continued playing, but even the music seemed thinner now. Richard drew in a slow breath. "Margaret Whitmore is the new Chief Executive Officer of Caldwell Medical Systems." The words did not echo, but they might as well have. They traveled from table to table without anyone repeating them. The woman with the reading glasses covered her mouth. One of the groomsmen turned fully around in his chair. Daniel stared at me as if the face he had known his whole life had suddenly become unreadable. Brittany did not move. Her smile stayed in place for 1 second longer than it should have, then disappeared piece by piece. "That is not possible," she said. Richard's voice hardened. "It is not only possible. The board confirmed it this evening." I looked at Brittany then, not with anger. Anger would have given her too much of me. I looked at her the way I had looked at failing departments, missing invoices, and executives who thought charm could replace integrity. She swallowed, glancing from her father to me, then to Daniel, searching for someone to put the room back the way it had been 5 minutes earlier. No one could. Richard turned back to me, lower now, almost apologetic. "I hope you will allow me to correct this seating situation." I picked up the thin place card between 2 fingers and read the small gray words one final time. "Daniel's mother." Then I set it down gently. "Do not trouble yourself," I said. "This seat has been very educational." Brittany looked at the place card as if those small gray letters had betrayed her more than I ever could. For the first time that evening, She had no speech ready, no graceful insult tucked behind her teeth, no polished smile strong enough to cover what the room had just learned. She turned to Daniel, waiting for him to step in the way he had stepped in for her all evening. He did open his mouth, but no words came out. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. There are moments when a son becomes a stranger so slowly that a mother does not notice until he is standing 3 feet away from her and still feels unreachable. Richard cleared his throat. "Margaret," he said, "careful now, formal now. Please join us at the family table." The words should have felt like a correction. Instead, they felt like proof. A seat offered only after power is discovered is not respect. It is strategy. I picked up my purse and stood, not because I needed the better table, but because I wanted to see what everyone would do when the invisible woman crossed the room. The guests parted with uncomfortable politeness. People who had ignored me an hour earlier now watched me, as if my navy blue dress had transformed into something expensive in front of their eyes. The dress had not changed. The woman inside it had not changed either. Only their understanding had. As we walked toward the front, Brittany hurried beside her father, speaking in a low, tight voice. "Daddy, there must be some misunderstanding. You never told me she was involved with the company." Richard did not look at her. The board was handling a confidential transition. "But she is Daniel's mother," Brittany whispered, as though that made my qualifications less real. Richard stopped walking. The entire group around us slowed with him. "She is also the reason 2 of our competitors are still in business after restructuring," he said. "She has more experience fixing broken companies than anyone I have interviewed in 10 years. Brittany's cheeks flushed beneath her wedding makeup. Evelyn Caldwell rose from her chair as we approached, wearing the brittle smile of a woman trying to calculate whether she should hug me or fear me. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, reaching for both my hands. "What a wonderful surprise." We had no idea. I let her touch my fingers for exactly 1 second, then gently withdrew. I have heard that several times tonight. The sentence was quiet, but it landed harder than anything I could have shouted. At the head table, a chair was quickly added between Richard and Daniel. A server removed a decorative vase to make room for me. The same wedding coordinator who had guided me to table 19 now avoided my eyes while smoothing the linen in front of my plate. I sat down slowly. Daniel stood beside his chair, pale and stiff, waiting for some cue from me. I did not give him one. Brittany remained standing in her white gown, bouquet lowered at her side, her fingers tightening around the stems. "Margaret," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded thin and strange, "I hope you did not misunderstand anything. Earlier, weddings are so stressful, and everyone says silly things." I looked at her for a long moment. Long enough for the people nearby to stop moving. Long enough for Daniel to shift his weight. Long enough for her smile to begin trembling at the corners. "I understood you clearly," I said. That was the problem. Richard closed his eyes for half a second, as if a private fear had just been confirmed. Brittany glanced around, realizing too late that the room she had used as a stage had become a witness. Daniel leaned toward me and murmured, "Mom, can we talk privately?" I turned to him then, really looked at him. The boy with flour on his hands. The teenager in a graduation gown. The man who had heard his wife insult me and told me not to start something. "Not yet," I said. "You had all evening to speak privately with your conscience." His face tightened, but he did not argue. The band had stopped between songs, leaving a quiet gap in the ballroom. I placed my folded hands on the table and looked at the people gathered around me. The flowers, the candles, the expensive silverware, the family that had decided my worth depended on where I sat. Then I turned to Brittany and gave her the same small smile she had given me earlier. "Enjoy your reception," I said. "Monday morning will arrive soon enough." The words did not make Brittany collapse, but they did something quieter and more useful. They made her think. I watched it happen behind her eyes, that fast little movement of calculation that polished people use when charm stops working. She lowered herself into the chair beside Daniel, but she no longer looked like a bride enjoying her victory. She looked like a woman reviewing every careless sentence she had spoken within earshot of the wrong person. Richard sat to my left, stiff and silent. Evelyn kept lifting her water glass without drinking from it. Daniel stared at the table setting in front of him as if the fork, knife, and spoon had arranged themselves into an answer he did not want to read. The reception tried to continue. The cake was wheeled out. The photographer called for smiles. A cousin made a cheerful announcement about the first dance, and the guests clapped because guests at weddings will clap through almost anything if the music is loud enough. Brittany and Daniel stepped onto the dance floor beneath a ring of warm lights. She moved gracefully, but her face kept turning toward me. Once, twice, 3 times. I sat with my hands folded and watched without expression. Not because I enjoyed her fear. Fear is noisy and temporary. I preferred understanding. I wanted her to understand that cruelty has a memory, even when the person receiving it says nothing. Richard leaned slightly toward me. "I owe you an apology," he said under the music. "For tonight, and perhaps for more than tonight." I looked at him. "You owe your employees honesty first. Personal apologies can wait." He absorbed that with a small nod. It was not the answer he expected, but it was the one he needed. "The board packet you received was incomplete," he said quietly. "There are family reimbursement accounts. I was told they were minor." "They are not minor," I said. His face turned toward me slowly. He knew then that I had already read more than anyone realized. "We will discuss it Monday," I added. "In the office, not beside a wedding cake." He looked at Brittany on the dance floor, then back at me, and his expression changed from embarrassment to concern. That was when I knew the real story at Caldwell Medical Systems was deeper than late payments and careless spending. Brittany had grown up believing her last name was a shield. People like that often forget a shield can become evidence when held in the wrong place for too long. After the dance, Daniel came to my chair again. This time he did not tell me to behave. He did not defend Brittany. He stood there with his hands at his sides, looking younger than he had all night. "Mom," he said, "why did you never tell me?" I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. "Tell you what, Daniel? That I had a career? That I was competent? That the woman who packed your lunches also knew how to read a financial statement?" His eyes reddened, though no tears fell. "That is not what I meant." "Yes," I said softly. "It is." He looked toward Brittany, who was speaking quickly to her mother near the cake table. Then he looked back at me. I did not know she would say something like that. I let the silence sit between us long enough for him to feel its shape. "You knew after she said it," I replied. That was the part that mattered. His mouth tightened. For the first time that evening, he had no excuse ready. I stood and picked up my purse. The reception still had another hour, maybe 2. There would be cake, more photographs, polished goodbyes, and 1,000 little performances of happiness. I had given the evening enough of myself. Richard rose when I did. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Brittany saw me standing and started toward us, but I lifted one hand slightly, not to stop her with force, only with certainty. She stopped anyway. I walked past the front table, past the flowers I had helped pay for, past the photographer who suddenly seemed desperate to capture me now. At the ballroom doors, I turned once and looked back at my son. He was standing between his bride and his mother, exactly where he had been all night, except now the choice was visible. I did not wait to see which way he moved. I stepped into the quiet hotel hallway, and the doors closed softly behind me. Monday morning arrived without music, flowers, or champagne. It arrived with gray light over downtown Charleston, the smell of fresh coffee in a conference room, and 12 board members sitting straighter than they had probably sat in years. I walked into Caldwell Medical Systems at 8 o'clock wearing a charcoal suit, low heels, and the same pearl necklace Brittany had laughed at 2 nights earlier. No one mentioned the wedding. Professional people rarely begin with the truth when discomfort will do. Richard stood when I entered. So did everyone else. I placed my leather folder at the head of the table and looked through the glass wall at rows of employees already working at their desks, people whose paychecks depended on decisions made by families who had confused ownership with entitlement. That thought steadied me more than any apology could have. I did not come to that company to punish a bride. I came to repair what arrogance had damaged. The first hour was quiet. I reviewed vendor delays, cash flow problems, executive compensation, and the vague consulting accounts that had been left too vague for too long. No names were raised at first. Only numbers. Numbers are patient. They do not blush. They do not make excuses. They sit on the page until someone honest enough reads them aloud. By 10:15, the room had gone very still. The so-called Family Image Fund had paid for private travel, designer event deposits, luxury salon appointments, and several wedding-related invoices that had no business passing through a medical supply company. Richard's face aged 10 years while I read the list. I did not look pleased. I did not look cruel. I simply turned the page. Effective immediately, I said. All discretionary family reimbursements are frozen. Every account will be audited by an outside firm. Any personal charges will be repaid before executive bonuses are discussed. If anyone objects, they may submit that objection in writing. No one objected. At 11:30, Brittany appeared in the lobby downstairs. I saw her through the glass from the second-floor walkway. No wedding gown now, no circle of bridesmaids, no microphone. Just a pale cream coat, dark sunglasses in one hand, and panic tucked behind her posture. She had come with Daniel. My son looked tired, as if the 2 days since the wedding had introduced him to a version of marriage he had not expected to meet so soon. My assistant asked whether I wanted to see them. I said yes, but only in conference room B, with the door open and the company attorney present. That detail made Brittany's mouth tighten when she walked in. "Margaret," she began, her voice soft in the way people use when witnesses are nearby. "I owe you an apology." I let her sentence rest on the table between us. "For what exactly?" Her eyes moved to the attorney, then to Daniel, then back to me. "For my words. For the seating. For everything that may have seemed disrespectful." "Seemed," I repeated. She swallowed. Daniel lowered his head. "Mom," he said quietly, "she is trying." I looked at him, and this time I felt no urge to rescue him from discomfort. "No, Daniel. She is measuring the damage." Brittany's face flushed, but she said nothing. I opened the folder in front of me and slid one document across the table, not dramatically, not angrily, just far enough for her to see the highlighted charges. "This is not about a dress, Brittany. It is not even about the name you called me. A cruel mouth reveals character, but paperwork reveals habits. The company will recover every dollar that does not belong to your family." For once, she had no sharp answer. Daniel looked at the document, then at his wife, and something in his face changed. Not enough to heal years in a moment, but enough to show that blindness had become a choice he could no longer afford. When they left, Daniel paused at the door. "I am sorry," he said. I nodded. Then become someone who would have defended me before he needed proof I mattered. He had no answer, but this time silence did not protect him. It taught him. By sunset, the audit order had been signed, the reimbursement freeze was in effect, and Caldwell Medical Systems had its first honest day in a long time. I drove home under a pink Carolina sky, took off my heels by the front door, and hung my navy blue dress carefully in the closet. It was still modest, still simple, still mine. Brittany had judged it before she knew my name. Daniel had judged my silence before he knew my strength. But I had learned something too. When people place you near the service doors, let them. Sometimes the back of the room gives you the clearest view of everyone who forgot you were watching.